for tuning in to another episode of Teen Gen Talks, where the goal is to empower the youth of Glendale and connect youth to community resources, individuals, and organizations through interviews and discussions. I'm your host, Melissa.
And I'm Desiree, and we had the pleasure of talking to Ruth Chan. Ruth is an illustrator and author who spent her childhood tobogganing in Canada, her teens in China, and a number of years studying art and education, and a decade working with youth and families in underserved communities. She now writes and illustrates full-time in Brooklyn, New York. Hope you enjoy the interview.
Thank you, Ruth, for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. We have a lot to discuss.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Chan. I'm excited to be here.
Well, to start off the interview, I want to take you back in time to your childhood in Canada. When did you fall in love with drawing and art itself?
Honestly, I can't remember a time I didn't love drawing. I think I drew a lot as a kid, and I think a lot of kids draw a lot. But I think the moment that it became something for me was one summer where I painted like 50 paintings and then went around my neighborhood knocking on doors and asking neighbors to buy my paintings for like $2. And I think they felt sorry for me. So they bought like a couple, and my parents definitely bought like the most. But I remember really enjoying making those paintings. So yeah, ever since I was a kid, I loved making art.
You also mentioned in your bio how your teenage years you spent time in Hong Kong and China. How do you feel like spending your years there shaped you and your art?
Oh man, it's really a part of my identity now, right? So I can't imagine thinking of like who I am without sort of the roots that I have in Asia and spending time there. And it's like from surface level thing to like from language, speaking Chinese to food. But like on the deeper level, I think realizing like the rich history that my family comes from, really realizing like some of the values that my parents sort of imbued on me. Even though I was born in Canada, there were all these values that I didn't realize were like Chinese values, that some of them are really lovely. And I think in terms of my art, most recently, it's been really important to me to have representation in art, specifically in like the children's books that I make and also the comics that I do. I think it's really, especially since all of the anti-Asian hate, I think it's all the more important for Asians or any people of color to talk about their experiences, and also be really proud of where they come from.
And you later spent a decade working with youth and families in schools, after school and summer programs in underserved communities in Boston, DC, and NYC. What gravitated you to this avenue?
I think that all of us sort of have an inherent sense of justice. And I think I was really lucky to have parents and be in schools and in activities that really sort of like emphasize that value. And so for me, coming out of college and grad school, there was so much injustice in like poverty, just like social economic wealth. And it was something that I really wanted to do, was like, what can I do? Not as like a coming down as a savior, but, like given the gifts that I have and the opportunities that I've been giving, how can I use those to sort of like fight that injustice, specifically of poverty? So that's kind of how I first started off with teaching, and then I sort of kind of moved into like nonprofit management in community-based organizations. And we provided free after school and summer programming for families. And that was really cool because like it was really hard work, but every day I woke up, I knew exactly why I was going to work. And also like the families, like the relationships that I made with them, I'm still like, I think it's been 10 years, 15 years, and I'm still in touch with a lot of the families. And some of the kids I had in kindergarten are like in college now. So it's been really great.
What did you learn during your time working with youth and families?
So much. I think the thing that I learned the most is that youth, like children and like teens, I mean anyone really, and adults too, is, everybody deserves to be seen and heard. And I think a lot of society, the way society works, makes it so that a lot of people aren't seen and heard. And I think my work with the community-based organizations really helped me see, like, no, these kids that, like, the system is ignoring, they have a very unique voice, they have value, and it's not even because they're doing anything or they look a certain way, but just like inherently by being, they have value and therefore deserve to like have a voice. And I think the same goes for a lot of the parents too. So yeah, that's something I always keep thinking about even now.
I also want to discuss your path towards publication. How did that look, and what made you want to take that leap to pursue this passion?
I started off with teaching and then working with youth. And so like children's books were always something that I was around and something I really loved. And I really wanted to make picture books, because I think they're just like the most beautiful object. They tell these like amazing stories, they have beautiful art, there's beautiful words, but they can make you laugh, they can make you cry. And it's all in this like object, and that's something that kids can connect with and adults. So I was like, I want to make books, but like, man, it's so hard. And, many other people are better at it than I am. So it's just like a dream. And basically what happened, and I feel like this happens a lot in life, is that things don't go as you expect, right? Bad things happen. Life kind of falls apart sometimes. And that happened to me. And I realized, at that moment, I was like, oh, I have to like kind of reevaluate what I want to spend my life doing. I mean, I loved my work in nonprofit, but it was like in my heart of hearts, what do I really want to do? And I was like, I want to make children's books. And so I gave myself a year to really, really study it. I took classes. I went to all these events for children's books. I like practiced drawing. I made a portfolio. I worked and worked and worked to see if I could make it and like get a book published. And I was very lucky. I realized this doesn't happen for everyone, but it actually happened. Like I got my first book deal, and no regrets. It's pretty great.
So, what helped you navigate the publishing industry?
It took a lot of like research. I think like a lot of times we're like, oh, it's like about the people and networking, which is like true, right? But also it's like if you want to get into something, you have to understand how it works, right? So I spent a lot of time like following publishers, editors, agents, art directors on Twitter and on Instagram. I went to like a bunch of conferences, I took classes, and then I also read like a ton of children's books. And sometimes I would even just copy down the words word for word, just so I could start to understand like what makes a good children's book, like what's a good page turn, what is like the tone that makes a successful children's book, and then looking at the art and being like, what what sort of things in the art is compelling for a children's book. So for example, in a kid's book, you have text and you have picture, right? And you never want the text and the picture to say exactly the same thing, because then it's kind of redundant. You always want to have the text saying something and the visuals either like bringing out more details that the words aren't saying, or like something that's a little bit different. And like I wouldn't have known that if I didn't do the research and do all the work. So do your research, guys, whatever you want to get into.
And how, I guess, piggybacking off of that, how did you hone in on your craft and find your style in drawing?
I was just giving a talk yesterday about style. And, at first when I started, I was really nervous because like I didn't go to art school. A lot of people who make children's books have gone to art school. I don't have that background, but I went to this talk in my like research year, and this artist named Sean Tan, he had a couple quotes, and basically he said like, style is your personality. Like style is figuring out what you like, and style is how you make decisions. And that was kind of cool because I realized like, oh, right, like I don't have to like figure out my style. It's something that is like innate to me. And just do it, right? And obviously I had to practice a lot and get better at my certain style, and like I'm still working on it now, but I had to realize like I'm never gonna be able to like paint like Monet or like paint super realistic. Like that's just not my style, and that's okay. And once I realized what is my style, which is more like cartoony, then I could sort of like practice within that.
What is your creative process like, and where do you draw inspiration from?
Oh man, I think that's like the hardest question because like the tough thing about creativity is like you can't really force it, right? Like whether you're writing or drawing or like coming up with ideas, like you can't force your brain to have a good idea. It just like comes like in the shower, on a walk. And so I think the thing I've learned is like to be open and always sort of observing. And there's something I do, it's sort of like a line a day sort of thing where I keep a journal of every day I write down something that was like meaningful to me. So it could be something that was really beautiful or really funny, something that made me cry, something that just like felt nice. Like a lot of them are like, I felt the sun on my skin while sitting in the park, like very simple things. But I feel like I've pulled a lot of ideas from that list because one, it kind of gives me an idea, like I can kind of see what are the things that are like important to me, right? Like, oh, a lot of funny things. I write a lot of funny things, or I write a lot about like how the sunlight hits things at a certain angle. um, and I feel like keeping that list is helpful for those creative ideas.
And what is the difference you would say that you noticed as a young author and illustrator in comparison to being an adult professional author and illustrator?
I think one thing that I've learned as I'm like growing older in this industry is like how one, how to like stay humble, and two, how to take criticism. So I think starting out for anyone, or even if you take like an art class, and you have crits, it's really difficult to get feedback, even if people are there to like support you and are helping you make better art. It's really tough to like take that criticism. And I think especially in art or making books, right, or writing, you're like pouring yourself into that project. Like it's a very personal thing, and so in some ways you're very vulnerable, and then you're showing that stuff that you're feeling vulnerable and like precious about to other people, and they're like giving you feedback about it. Like that's just tough. And I think um the older I get, the more I'm able to like separate out like, okay, feedback is like helpful. Like we're all trying to make this book a better book. And so it's fine. And I think I don't know, it's hard because like I think a lot of artists waver between um like imposter syndrome and being like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, is anything I do even good? Like, what am I even doing this for? And then there's also the other side of it where it's like, no, this is like really good, but I don't want to be like cocky about it. And I think that's like the beautiful thing, especially about children's book industry, is like actually everyone is very humble. Like everyone's just very supportive of each other, and everyone really like admires each other's work because everyone's style is different. You can't really like compare. And I think that's been it's really nice.
So, when it comes to writing, how do you tackle the writing for your books?
Oh man, just like revising. So I think on average for picture books that I write, and they only have, like some people are like, oh, picture book, it's like pretty easy, man. It's like 200 to 400 words. Like, how hard can it be? But it's actually like even harder because you only have 400 words. And so you have to be like very selective of what words you use. And so usually I'll write like a really long version and write down like every single line that I want to put. And then I'll just revise and revise and revise. And usually each book has about like 20 different drafts until it gets to like the final one. But it's just like a lot of work and a lot of like it's not glamorous. I think every single one of my friends who also makes picture books feels the same. We're just like, oh my God, what am I doing? But eventually it gets there. It's just a lot of work.
And when you are asked to do illustrations for another author, how do you know if it's the right project for you to contribute to?
That's a good question. I think when I read other manuscripts that come in, at the end of the day, it's like, what is my gut telling me? Like, am I psyched? Would I be psyched to illustrate this book, right? And really it comes down to that, because if I'm not psyched about illustrating it, then it doesn't really do that book or the author or the editor or the publisher justice, right? Like whoever signs on to that book should be like super excited about it. And it took me a long time to like be okay with that. You know, I felt bad being like, no, this is like not really. But the more I realized like things, you know, books that work for me are the ones that are most exciting. And then ones that are not the most exciting, there's another illustrator who's like perfect for that book. Yeah.
So Rick the Rock is the latest book that you illustrated. How did that opportunity arise?
So the Rick the Rock just came out in August. So the author of Rick the Rock, Julie Falatko, she and I had actually worked on a book together a couple years ago called The Great Indoors. So she was the author and I was the illustrator. And we kind of just got matched up randomly. Usually in the industry, the editor and the art director, the editor will acquire a manuscript and then they'll decide on an illustrator who they think would be a good fit. So the author actually doesn't really have much say, and we actually don't talk when we make the book. But we had so much fun making The Great Indoors that when Julie sold her manuscript, she was like, just want to put it out there to like, send this to Ruth and see if she'll like it. And of course I loved it. And so we got to work on it together. And we actually did talk while making this book because we're friends now. So
Uprooted is another project you are working on, and it's set to come out in 2024. Could you talk a bit more about this project?
Yeah, so this is a graphic memoir that I'm working on, and it's technically middle grade, but it could be middle grade YA. And it is about myself and about my move from Canada. When I was 13, I moved from Canada to Hong Kong. And it's basically an identity story and sort of an immigration story where, in Canada, I never felt like Canadian enough because I was Chinese. But then I moved to Hong Kong and all of a sudden I wasn't Chinese enough because I wasn't speaking as fluently. I was like clearly dressing like someone from North America. And the book is really about like belonging and sort of how do we find belonging in culture and in our family and with our friends, which I think is something that everyone can relate to. So yeah, I'm working on that. It's guys, it is like a lot of work to make a graphic novel. It's taking forever, but I should be done hopefully by the end of this year. Yeah, and then I'll come out 2024. I'm excited though. It'll be fun.
You also illustrate and create comics. Is that process in creating a comic slightly different than when you're doing a book project, or is it fairly similar?
I'd say it's pretty different. Like my comics are a lot of them are like from real life experiences, and usually I'll have an idea, like something will happen. I'm like, oh, I should make a comic about that. And then I'll write it out and it's pretty formulaic, it's like 8 to 10 frames is usually how I like to work. And I'll write it out and then draw it, and it's like much faster. And I don't know, I think like comics it's different, right? Because it's like I'm making them for myself, or I'm making them to share on social media. But it's I can make it however I want. There's no like editor that's looking at it. And so for the comics, I feel like I work very like quickly, because I'm just like, oh, my gut feeling about this is, and then I'll write it out within like an hour and then start drawing it. So, but sometimes I don't have ideas and I don't make comics, and that's okay too.
And to you, what does all of this mean to you? And what do you hope people feel when seeing your illustrations and picking up your books?
I think at the end of the day, like anything that I create, I would want people to, I don't know, I've lately I've been thinking like I want people to know that they're not alone in something. Whether that is like a feeling or a circumstance or whatever. I think it's important for people to connect, and especially with things that are more challenging or serious, or even in picture books, like with emotions that are like hard or sad. um I think whatever I do, I want to create an opportunity for people to connect, I guess.
Before we end, we have some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Is
Sweating. Okay.
your favorite color?
My favorite color is turquoise.
When are you the happiest?
In nature.
Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self?
Trust yourself and do things the way that you want to do it. Don't be so worried about what other people think.
If you could have 3 people, dead or alive, for dinner guests, who would they be?
Oh my gosh. I would have the only 3. Okay, I really got into BTS lately, like so hard. So I want all 7 BTS at dinner. Is that an okay answer? Yeah.
Yeah, that is for sure an okay
I
answer.
mean, you can't have them separate. So
Exactly.
I know they're taking a break, but yeah, I want BTS to have dinner with me.
So, what is a song that you have on repeat currently?
Oh my God, like all the BTS songs. I just watched their Busan concert like twice in a row. But like Dynamite's really stuck in my head. Like right now, it's like running in the back of my head. So
What do you want your legacy to be?
BTS Army. No, just kidding. I think my legacy, I would hope that I would be remembered for being authentic, I guess. I think I think everything that I do, I try to be vulnerable with and honest with. And because I think that's where people connect the most, is like in those moments of honesty and authenticity. So that's what I'm hoping.
What is a book that you have recently read or currently reading that you would recommend?
I just finished Brown Girls by Daphne Palasi Andreades. Yes. And I don't know if you guys have read it. It's so good, but it's it's kind of poetic, and it's basically talking about girls of color living in New York City and sort of their experience growing up. It is beautiful. It's so good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ruth. We learned a lot about you. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to sit down with us and talk. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they could connect with you?
I will have this graphic memoir out in 2024, but in the meantime, you can connect. I'm mostly on Instagram at Otruth, OHTRUTH. It's the same handle for Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate you and taking your time to be here with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. This was super fun.
Did you enjoy this episode? I'm sure you did. Don't forget to follow us on our socials, both on Facebook and Instagram at MyGlendaleLLAC.
And follow us on Spotify and Apple or anywhere where you get your podcast from at Teen Gen Talks, the podcast. Also, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Glendale Library Arts and Culture, where we post the full episode videos every Friday at 4:30 p.m.